This your car?
Yes. Why?
Expensive car like this. How'd you afford it?
Excuse me? I'm a judge. Who do you think you're talking to?
I don't believe you. Hands on the hood, now.
I'm not doing that. My ID is right in my purse. I said hands.
The security footage from Westfield Galleria would later become evidence in one of the largest police misconduct settlements in California history. What Officer Ryan Beckford didn't realize as he approached a black woman smoking a cigarette next to her Range Rover was that he had just confronted a United States district judge, a woman who had spent 23 years in the legal system, a woman who had sentenced corrupt police officers to prison, a woman who knew her constitutional rights better than he knew his own badge number, and a woman who was about to make him pay 14.8 million for the next 12 minutes of his life. It was 2:23 on a Saturday afternoon in the parking lot of an upscale shopping mall in Sacramento. The sun was bright. The lot was busy with weekend shoppers loading bags into their cars. Near the back of the lot, away from the crowds, a black woman in her early 50s stood beside a pearl-white Range Rover Sport, taking a quiet smoke break after 2 hours of shopping. She had earned this moment. It had been a brutal week on the bench, 3 sentencing hearings, 2 complex civil trials, and a stack of motions that never seemed to shrink. She just wanted 5 minutes of peace before driving home. She would not get those 5 minutes. Instead, she would get an encounter that would trend nationally, spark federal investigations, and end the career of a 9-year police veteran who thought his badge made him untouchable. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. What happens next to Officer Beckford is something you need to see. The woman standing next to that Range Rover was Judge Vanessa Richardson, United States District Judge for the Eastern District of California, appointed by the President 7 years earlier, confirmed by the Senate with bipartisan support. Before that, she spent 16 years as a federal prosecutor, specializing in public corruption and civil rights violations. She had personally prosecuted 11 police officers for misconduct. She had sent 8 of them to federal prison. She was brilliant. She was respected. She had argued cases before the Supreme Court. Law students studied her opinions. Defense attorneys feared her courtroom. She was, by any measure, one of the most powerful legal figures in the entire state of California. And on that Saturday afternoon, she was about to be treated like a criminal because she was a black woman standing next to an expensive car. Officer Ryan Beckford was working overtime that day, patrolling the mall parking lot as part of a department initiative to reduce vehicle break-ins. He had been on the force for 9 years. He had a reputation among his colleagues as aggressive but effective. What his colleagues didn't talk about openly, but what his personnel file documented clearly, was a pattern of complaints. 14 complaints over 9 years. The majority involved stops of black and Hispanic citizens. The majority described the same behavior: confrontational approaches, demands for identification without cause, searches without consent. The department had noted these complaints. They had required Beckford to complete additional training twice. They had issued verbal counselings. But they had never taken serious disciplinary action. They had never questioned whether an officer with 14 complaints should still be patrolling. That institutional failure was about to cost the city more money than they could have imagined. Beckford spotted the Range Rover from across the lot. Brand new model, pristine condition, easily a $90,000 vehicle, and standing next to it, a black woman in casual clothes, smoking a cigarette. Something about that picture didn't sit right with him. Something that he would never admit openly, but that guided his decision to drive across the parking lot, pull up behind the Range Rover, and step out of his patrol car. His first words were not a greeting. They were not an explanation. They were an accusation disguised as a question. He asked if the vehicle was hers. Vanessa turned, surprised by the sudden presence of a police officer. She had dealt with enough law enforcement in her career to read body language instantly. The way he positioned himself, the way his hand rested near his belt, the way he looked at her, then at the car, then back at her, as if the two things couldn't possibly belong together. She answered calmly that, yes, it was her car. She asked if there was a problem. Beckford didn't answer the question. Instead, he asked how she could afford a car like this. He asked where she worked. He asked where she was coming from and where she was going. None of these questions had any legitimate law enforcement purpose. She was not committing a crime. She was not suspected of a crime. She was standing in a parking lot next to her own legally purchased vehicle, smoking a cigarette. But Vanessa understood the reality of being a black woman confronted by a hostile police officer. She understood that asserting her rights too aggressively could escalate the situation dangerously. So she answered his questions. She told him she was a judge. She told him the car was purchased legally and registered in her name. Beckford's response told her everything she needed to know. He laughed, actually laughed. Then he said he didn't believe her. He said a lot of people claim to be things they weren't when they got caught. He told her to put her hands on the vehicle. Quick question for everyone watching. Have you ever had someone refuse to believe who you are? Type yes in the comments if you have. Vanessa did not put her hands on the vehicle. She was not under arrest. She had committed no crime. She had no legal obligation to comply with this demand. Instead, she calmly stated that she was reaching into her car to retrieve her credentials. Her judicial ID was in her purse on the front seat. She could prove exactly who she was in 5 seconds if he would. Simply allow her to do so. Beckford grabbed her arm before she could move. The touch was firm and aggressive, not a gentle guidance, a grip, a statement of control and dominance. He told her not to move. He told her to keep her hands where he could see them. He positioned himself between her and the car door, blocking access to the very identification that would have ended this encounter immediately. Vanessa felt the pressure of his fingers on her arm and made a decision that would prove crucial. With her free hand, she slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She activated the voice recorder. If this officer was going to violate her rights, she was going to document every second of it. She stated clearly for the recording her name, her title, and exactly what was happening. She stated that she had identified herself as a federal judge. She stated that the officer was physically restraining her without cause. She stated that she had not been read any rights or told she was under arrest. Beckford saw the phone. His reaction was immediate and hostile. He demanded she put it away. She calmly informed him that she had every legal right to record a police interaction in a public space. He didn't like that answer. What happened next was captured not only by her phone, but by the mall's security cameras and by at least 4 witnesses who had stopped to watch and begun recording on their own devices. Beckford spun Vanessa around and pushed her against the side of her own Range Rover. Her face pressed against the window. Her arm was wrenched behind her back. The cigarette she had been holding fell to the ground. Her phone clattered onto the asphalt but kept recording. She was 52 years old. She had spent her entire adult life serving the law. She had never been arrested. She had never been handcuffed, and now she was being treated like a violent criminal in broad daylight, because a police officer couldn't accept that a black woman might legitimately own a nice car. The witnesses' videos showed everything. They showed Vanessa remaining calm and cooperative throughout the encounter. They showed Beckford becoming increasingly aggressive without any provocation. They showed him patting her down, searching her pockets, and demanding to know if she had any weapons or drugs. They showed her repeatedly stating that she was a federal judge and asking why she was being detained. They showed him ignoring every word she said. One witness, a white woman in her 40s, approached and asked what was going on. She said she had been watching the whole time and hadn't seen the other woman do anything wrong. Beckford told her to mind her own business and step back. She did not step back. She kept recording. Another witness, a young man who worked at one of the mall stores, called 911 to report what he described as a police officer assaulting a woman in the parking lot for no reason. That call would later become part of the evidence file. Beckford finally called for backup. When he did, he told dispatch he had detained a suspicious individual who was refusing to cooperate and claiming to be a federal judge. The way he said it made clear he didn't believe her. Dispatch asked if he had verified her identity. He said he hadn't had the opportunity because she was being combative. The witness's videos showed she had been nothing of the kind. Type karma in the comments if you can see where this is going. Backup arrived within 6 minutes. 2 additional officers, a man named Torres and a woman named Chen, pulled into the parking lot to find a scene that immediately concerned them. A well-dressed black woman pinned against an expensive SUV. A crowd of witnesses recording on their phones, their colleague looking defensive and agitated. Officer Chen approached first. She asked Beckford to explain the situation. He said he had observed a suspicious individual next to a vehicle that didn't match her profile. Chen asked what specifically was suspicious. Beckford couldn't give a clear answer. Chen turned to Vanessa and asked calmly and professionally if she could provide identification. Vanessa, still pressed against her car, said her purse was on the front seat and contained her judicial credentials. She asked permission to retrieve them. Chen told Beckford to release her so she could get her ID. Beckford hesitated. For a long moment, he just stood there, his hand still on Vanessa's arm, as if letting go would be admitting he had made a mistake. Finally, reluctantly, he stepped back. Vanessa straightened her clothes. She rubbed her arm where he had gripped her. She took a breath to compose herself. Then she opened her car door, reached into her purse, and pulled out her credential case. The gold seal of the United States District Court gleamed in the afternoon sun. Her judicial ID showed her photograph, her name, and her title. Everything she had told Beckford from the very first moment was true. Officer Chen looked at the credentials. She looked at Beckford. She looked back at the credentials. Her expression said everything her words did not. She quietly told Beckford that he needed to apologize immediately, and that they needed to clear the scene before this got any worse than it already was. It was already too late for that. Beckford did not apologize. Even now, faced with irrefutable proof that he had assaulted and detained a federal judge without any cause whatsoever, he could not bring himself to admit he was wrong. He muttered something about the situation being suspicious and the car matching a general description. There was no matching description. There had been no report of a stolen white Range Rover. It was a lie, invented on the spot to justify what he had done. And Vanessa, who had spent decades in courtrooms watching people lie, recognized it immediately. She asked for his badge number. She asked for his full name. She asked for the names and badge numbers of the other officers present. She stated that she would be filing a formal complaint with the police department, the city government, and the FBI. Then she said something that would later be quoted in news articles across the country. She told Officer Beckford that she had sent men like him to prison. She told him that she knew exactly what civil rights violations looked like because she had prosecuted them for 16 years. And she told him that by the time she was finished, he would understand exactly how much his assumptions about her were going to cost him. She got in her car and drove away. But she did not drive home. She drove directly to the FBI field office in Sacramento. Have you ever seen someone dig their own grave this deep? Let me know in the comments. The FBI took her statement that same afternoon. As a federal judge reporting an assault by a local police officer, her complaint received immediate attention. Agents were assigned to the case within hours. By Monday morning, they had collected security footage from the mall, obtained copies of the witnesses' videos, pulled Beckford's complete personnel file, and begun interviewing everyone who had been present in that parking lot. The evidence was overwhelming and utterly damning. The security camera footage showed Beckford driving across the parking lot to approach Vanessa without any dispatch call or apparent reason. The witnesses' videos showed the entire confrontation from multiple angles. The audio from Vanessa's phone captured every word, including Beckford's refusal to believe her stated identity and his lies about a matching vehicle description. And then there was his personnel file. 14 complaints over 9 years. 14 separate incidents where citizens had reported being stopped, questioned, or searched without apparent cause. 11 of those complaints came from Black or Hispanic individuals. The complaints described a consistent pattern. Beckford approaching people based on nothing more than their appearance and making assumptions about whether they belonged in certain places, drove certain cars, or fit certain neighborhoods. 3 complaints specifically mentioned that Beckford had accused citizens of having stolen vehicles they legitimately owned. One of those complaints came from a Black doctor driving a Porsche. Another from a Hispanic businessman in a Mercedes. The department had sustained none of these complaints. Beckford had received nothing more than additional training that obviously hadn't changed his behavior. The Sacramento Police Department was facing a nightmare. A federal judge assaulted by one of their officers. Video evidence from multiple sources. A documented pattern of racial profiling that they had failed to address for nearly a decade. They knew exactly what was coming. Beckford was placed on administrative leave immediately. Within a week, as the story began gaining media attention, he was terminated. The official announcement cited multiple policy violations, conduct unbecoming an officer, unlawful detention, and failure to verify identity when a subject is providing identification. But losing his job was only the beginning. The United States Attorney's Office announced federal charges against Ryan Beckford 6 weeks after the incident. Deprivation of rights under color of law, assault, filing a false police report. Each charge carried potential prison time. Together, they represented the destruction of everything he had built over 9 years in law enforcement. The trial became a national story. A white police officer accused of racially profiling and assaulting a black federal judge in a mall parking lot. The optics could not have been worse for the defense. The evidence could not have been more clear. Beckford's attorney tried the same strategy that had worked for so many officers before. He argued that his client had made an honest mistake, that he genuinely believed the situation was suspicious, that police officers have to make difficult judgment calls every day. The prosecutor destroyed that argument with 3 words: 14 prior complaints. This was not an honest mistake. This was a pattern of behavior that had been documented, reported, and ignored for almost a decade. Beckford had done this before, again and again, to people who didn't have the power to fight back. He had finally done it to someone who did. Judge Richardson testified for 3 hours. She walked the jury through every moment of the encounter. She explained constitutional law in terms anyone could understand. She described exactly which of her rights had been violated and how. She was calm, precise, and devastating. She also testified about something else. She testified about what it felt like to be a black woman in America, even a black woman who had achieved the highest levels of professional success. She testified about being followed in stores, questioned in nice neighborhoods, assumed to be the help rather than the homeowner. She testified that the encounter in that parking lot was not an isolated incident, but a lifetime of assumptions condensed into 12 horrible minutes. When she finished, several jurors were in tears. The defense called character witnesses who described Beckford as a dedicated officer and a good person. Under cross-examination, none of them could explain 14 complaints. None of them could explain why a good person would refuse to let a woman show identification that would have ended the encounter immediately. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Beckford showed no emotion when the verdict was read. His wife, sitting in the gallery, began to cry. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder. Somewhere in that courtroom, justice had finally arrived. Sentencing came 2 months later. The judge, a white man in his 60s who had served on the federal bench for over 20 years, had harsh words for Beckford. He said that police officers held a sacred public trust. He said that trust was violated every time an officer used their badge to harass, intimidate, or assault citizens based on the color of their skin. He said that officers like Beckford did more damage to public safety than the criminals they claimed to be protecting against, because they made entire communities fear the people who were supposed to protect them. He sentenced Ryan Beckford to 6 years in federal prison, to be followed by 3 years of supervised release. He permanently banned him from working in any law enforcement capacity. He ordered him to pay restitution and complete extensive counseling on racial bias. 6 years. For 12 minutes in a parking lot. Every second of that sentence was earned. Do you think the sentence was fair? Let me know in the comments. The civil lawsuit was even more devastating. Judge Richardson retained one of the most successful civil rights law firms in the country. They filed suit against Beckford personally, against the city of Sacramento, and against the police department for its systemic failure to address a documented pattern of racial profiling. The city's lawyers knew they couldn't win. The evidence was irrefutable. The video footage had been viewed over 30 million times online. The pattern of ignored complaints showed deliberate indifference to citizens' constitutional rights. Public pressure was immense. The city council was receiving thousands of calls and emails demanding accountability. The settlement negotiations took 4 months. The final number made national headlines. $14.8 million. $14.8 million for a 12-minute encounter in a parking lot. It was one of the largest individual settlements for police misconduct in American history, and it came with requirements that went far beyond money. The city agreed to implement comprehensive reforms, mandatory implicit bias training for all officers, not the ineffective online courses Beckford had taken, but intensive ongoing training with real accountability. A civilian review board with actual power to investigate complaints and recommend discipline. An early warning system to identify officers with patterns of problematic behavior before they caused irreparable harm. body cameras for all officers with strict policies ensuring footage couldn't be conveniently lost or deleted. The city agreed to an independent monitor who would oversee their compliance for 7 years. They agreed to regular public reports on complaint patterns and disciplinary actions. They agreed to pay for community programs designed to rebuild trust between the police department and communities of color. The institutional change was worth more than the money. Judge Richardson made that clear in every interview she gave. She donated a significant portion of her settlement to organizations providing legal representation to victims of police misconduct who didn't have her resources or her platform. She established a scholarship fund for Black students pursuing careers in law and law enforcement. She funded community programs and advocacy, groups and legal clinics. She transformed her trauma into systemic change. She made sure that what happened to her would be harder to do to someone else. What would you have done with that settlement? Tell me in the comments. The aftermath rippled outward for years. 4 supervisors at the Sacramento Police Department who had reviewed and dismissed complaints against Beckford were investigated. 2 were demoted. 2 were terminated. The message was clear. Willful blindness to officer misconduct would no longer be tolerated. 9 other officers were investigated based on complaint patterns similar to Beckford's. 5 were terminated. 3 resigned. 1 was demoted and placed under strict supervision. The department was being cleaned out, officer by officer. The case was studied in law schools, police academies, and civil rights organizations nationwide. It became a teaching example of racial profiling, of institutional failure, and of what accountability could look like when victims had the knowledge and resources to fight back. Officer Chen, who had responded to Beckford's backup call and immediately recognized the situation was wrong, was promoted twice in the following years. She now leads the department's Community Relations Division and trains new recruits on civil rights and constitutional policing. She tells them about that day in the parking lot. She tells them how quickly a career can end when bias goes unchecked. Officer Torres, who had been present but remained passive during the encounter, resigned 6 months later. He gave interviews saying he was ashamed of himself for not intervening sooner. He now works for a nonprofit organization that trains police departments on de-escalation and bias recognition. The mall where it happened installed a small plaque near the spot where Judge Richardson had been detained. It acknowledges what happened there and commits to treating all visitors with dignity and respect. Some people call it performative, but thousands of shoppers walk past it every week, and some of them stop to read it, and some of them remember. Judge Richardson continues to serve on the federal bench. She is now considered one of the most influential jurists in the Ninth Circuit. Her opinions are studied. Her rulings are cited. Young lawyers dream of arguing before her. But she has said publicly that no amount of professional success erases what happened that day. No title or achievement makes her immune from being seen as suspicious simply because she is Black. She still gets followed in stores sometimes. She still sees people clutch their purses when she walks by. She still knows that her Range Rover, parked in certain neighborhoods, will attract assumptions. The difference is that now, when it happens, people know her name. People know what she did. People know that she fought back and won. And Ryan Beckford? He served 5 years and 2 months of his 6-year sentence. He was released to a world that had not forgotten him. His face and name are permanently linked to one of the most viral police misconduct cases of the decade. He lost his career, he lost his pension, he lost his marriage, he lost his reputation. Last reports placed him living in a small apartment in Nevada, working odd jobs, trying to rebuild something from the wreckage of his life. His children, now adults, have publicly distanced themselves from him. Former colleagues refuse to associate with him. He is, by every measure, a cautionary tale. He had 9 years on the force. He threw it all away in 12 minutes because he saw a Black woman next to a nice car and decided she didn't deserve to be there. $14.8 million, 6 years in prison, a career destroyed, a family shattered, all because he couldn't accept that a Black woman might legitimately own a Range Rover. Some lessons are learned the hard way. If you've made it to the end of this story, you understand why it matters. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video so others can see what accountability actually looks like. What was the most shocking part of this story for you? Let me know in the comments below.